Tonight, we are talking about a topic that is very real for me right now. Um, just to be perfectly candid, I have a lot on my mind when it comes to relationships and conflict. And this topic tonight that I actually am still looking forward to discussing with you is the difference between truth and experience. And y'all, this is probably, I'm thinking about this comparison probably in depth for the first time in this lens. There's something about what we can learn when we're in a moment of being activated, being frustrated, feeling kind of upset. I like the term activation because it's a little bit more neutral, but it helps us understand that there's some charge there. It's not like we're in a negative emotion or a positive emotion. It's just that there's emotion here that we need to contend with. And honestly, I have found the best and most meaningful realizations have come from this state. And so there's actually something I was talking with my mom about this the other day. She was mentioning how much she hates when her kids are in pain, and rightly so in some ways. It's actually so loving of a mother to keep her child safe. And there's this, I think it's Freud. He says, the good mother fails. The good mother lets her child experience pain and experience suffering for the purpose of the lesson that is on the other side of that pain and suffering. And I found that the more I really lean into my pain, the more I lean into this suffering, the more I actually get to experience the other side, which is so often it's growth, it's freedom in a sense. And so the more I actually lean into the discomfort of being activated and feeling an emotion, the more lesson there is on the other side of that. And so that's, I suppose you could say, number one. I'm so grateful that we're chatting right now because I know that I need this moment to process with you. And y'all, there's something about both going to the journal and writing out the process. I love also speaking into my phone to kind of document the process. And this process with you chatting here is another way to process and come up with real frameworks and diving into topics of what do I really think about whatever it is that we're going to discuss. So tonight we're going to be discussing that difference between my truth and my experience, because my truth has been a very hot topic and very prevalent in a lot of conversations these days. And so just as I'm starting to dive in, I welcome you to comment here in the chat. I'm active on a couple different YouTube platforms. So hello, thank you so much for joining in, Shayla. I'm so sorry you're not sleeping. I'm so glad to see you though. Ibby, thank you so much for joining. Y'all feel free to ask questions or put your thoughts in here. I love learning with you and from you. So please join me tonight in the discussion. I'm excited to talk about this subject because the concept of my truth has been something that personally I've experienced. I've actually experienced the fallout of not knowing the difference between the two. And I've also experienced not having any kind of connection with my own inner world while in relationship with other people. Because so often that's when we run into this question of, my experience or my truth is often in relationship with somebody else. And for 8.5 years of my previous marriage, I really shut down access to my own inner compass. I took my former husband's word and I just followed him blindly. And I never really thought too much for myself. I really took what he said and believed whatever it was that he said. And that's in one sense, there's something very naive about that. That's often what kids do to their parents. They're just like, okay, and they kind of follow blindly. And so I was acting childlike in a sense in my former marriage for 8.5 years. And only when I really started asking questions and kind of expressing my experience, that's when everything started crumbling to the ground. But I had no idea what was my experience because I had never tapped into the intuition side of it. And so for 8.5 years, and even before then, I was really disassociated from both what I knew to be true and also my experience. So before we can even have this conversation of what's the difference between truth and experience, we have to actually acknowledge, am I even connected with myself at all to begin with, to then be able to get to this conversation? So I wanted to put that as kind of the precursor, because frankly, for 28 years, I was living very disconnected from both. And so I just saw your question here on YouTube. I was 20 years old when I got married, and I was married for 8.5 years. Um, and I want to get to your question of, doesn't your experience reflect your truth? Because there is a difference there. But before we get there, I want to just really address this point, because y'all, it's really, really damaging. I really cut off access to my own inner world and inner compass. I have this concept of, when our compass is oriented north, man, do we have vertical direction. We're heading north, we're heading up, we're heading in the right direction. But when we're broken, when our compass is navigating east and west, and we're looking to everyone around us to tell us who to be, how to live, how to feel, when we're looking to them to tell us what our experience is, that's so often where dissonance comes in. And dissonance is like that disconnection between the words being spoken and the actions portrayed. That's where dissonance comes from. And usually cognitive dissonance is what the word preceding that. Cognitive dissonance is really when you're observing someone and your feelings and your thoughts are like what you know to be what your thoughts are telling you in a cognitive level are different from your actual experience. So someone is saying, I'm so happy to be here at dinner with you. But then when you look at them, they're rolling their eyes and sighing and not engaging with you. That's an example of cognitive dissonance. I know you don't want to be here. Your body language is giving me that feeling, but your words are saying that you do. Therefore, I'm feeling confusion. There's a dissonance between my experience and the verbal communication. So something's off. And another way to kind of look at this, on the Knowing Show, we talk a lot about our intelligences, our physical intelligence, emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, spiritual intelligence. Cognitive dissonance, or just any kind of dissonance, is that there is a disconnect between any of those intelligences. And so to your question here, Monkey Balls, you asked on YouTube, you asked, how do you, like, wouldn't you just kind of assume that your experience is the same as your truth? Not always. And that's where it's okay, after we can kind of recognize, okay, am I even connected to all of my intelligences? Are all intelligences, all internal systems online and activated? Now I can kind of move on to this question of what's the difference between truth and experience. And, I was really, really disassociated, disconnected from most of my intelligences, my physical body. I grew up in a Christian conservative environment, and there was just a lot of shame around the physical body. So I actually really disassociated from my physical body and just kind of tried to ignore it, cover it up. And I felt a lot of shame there. And a lot of other people feel shame around their body for multiple reasons. But for me, it was that. So I really shut down physical intelligence. On the emotional intelligence side, I shut off that because I viewed emotions as weakness. If I'm emotionally vulnerable or feeling emotions, I am therefore weak and vulnerable to someone coming in and hurting me or taking advantage of me because of these emotions. Spiritual intelligence, it wasn't very intelligent. It was more so a regurgitation of, I don't know if that's a word, but regurgitating what I heard my parents, pastor, pope, priest, fill in the blank. I really regurgitated what I was told rather than what I knew and experienced, or what I knew to be true myself versus what I experienced. It was so much of it was told to me. And then the IQ, the intellectual intelligence, that's really where I had my value system placed. But our experience, so often it's both logic and emotion. It's IQ and EQ plus everything else. So I never understood how our physical body stores data. And I never understood the value of EQ, the emotional intelligence side of things, because when we understand how we're so integrated, so connected, even just today, I completed day 2 of the Knowing Retreat for some women. And actually, it was my first time hosting an event for Christian women, women who came honestly from an environment that I did. And we really drove home the point that there's more parts of us than just the intellect and more parts of us than just the spirit. Growing up in the church, we were so encouraged to just cultivate a relationship with God, but no cultivation with ourselves. We didn't know who we were. And for so many of us, we don't know ourselves. And the scripture I really drove home with these women was Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. It's all encompassing. It's every part of us that needs to be alive and awake and activated for the pursuit of, yes, loving God spiritually, but knowing ourselves emotionally, knowing our physical body, and engaging our mind. And so the concept of intelligence, having our intelligences truly employed in the then pursuit of truth versus experience is so important. And I really was only ever engaging one and a half. I was engaging my spirit, but it was more so in relation to what other people had told me about God, and then the IQ. The IQ for so many of us is cultivated in school since we were a child. And so that's almost a given that we'll have some semblance of intellectual, cognitive, logical reasoning developed. But for the other intelligences, man, is it really a struggle? This a woman was with us today, and she's in her 60s, and she's just like, wait, why do I need to know my emotions? Because that's 50% of the right hemisphere of our brain. We are both logical and emotional creatures, and we're modeled after the creator. God is both a God of chaos and of no, I'm sorry. That's so funny. He's a God of order, not chaos, and he's also a God of peace. It's like the logical order that comes and the peace that comes, the emotional sensation with the structure. And I love that we are made. I love that I said that. He's a God of chaos. That's so funny. And here's the thing, y'all. If we are really willing to look in the mirror, we'll really come to find such a depth of knowing and seeing ourselves, but also a depth of knowing and seeing God. I got to know God way more when I actually looked in the mirror and got to know myself. And so in this process of engaging all of our intelligences, only then can we ask the question of, okay, what's the difference of truth versus experience? So that's point, I guess you could say point number one. It's like we have to be awakened. And I was living asleep for the majority of my life. And I had to go through, I guess, point A is, okay, are you even awake? And point B is, if you're not, how do we wake up? How do we turn these intelligences online? Because I wasn't awake. I wasn't activated in terms of living with all intelligences speaking to me, informing me. And because of that, there was a significant consequence. I was living as a non-entity, as a non-person in some ways, looking to the right and to the left for everyone to tell me how to live, what my beliefs should be, value systems, etc. So to that point, as I'm thinking about how I recovered intuition, the Latin root of intuition is intuere, and it means to be taught from within. So to be taught from within requires that we take time to listen. And that process, this process of every morning, for me, it's morning, but every day quieting ourselves, each intelligence quieting it, our mind, body, soul, spirit, getting effectively all of us into a place of just like peace, and then listening. Who has something to say? I like to think of our intelligences as officers represented in a boardroom. Our spiritual intelligence comes online, our emotional intelligence, physical intelligence, and physical intelligence is a big one. The author Bessel van der Kolk was a psychiatrist, and he wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score, and he wrote about Vietnam war veterans, and he was actually the one that coined the term post-traumatic stress disorder. And so in that process of creating effectively a framework for how to deal with past trauma stored in the body, man, does that just bear and shed light on how, man, if we don't process things from the past, it's going to show up today, or in the present today. And so with that whole realization, I guess you could say, comes respect, like a humble, almost like holy respect for what our bodies know, what our souls know that we don't even realize. So when we say we don't know it yet, our body, our soul, our spirit, it all stores information. And the process of slowing down, leaning in, and asking why, those 3 steps, slowing down, leaning in, asking why, each one of those is so integral to coming to be aware of what's going on in the first place. And that's the first step of emotional intelligence, be aware. And then next is being able to understand. And that third part of slowing down, leaning in, and asking why is really how we come to understand what's going on with us to begin with. And so the third is then, okay, so for the definition of emotional intelligence, being aware, understanding, and then expressing. But we have to be aware and understand before we can express. So really, when we think about how to recover intuition, which was really a massive pursuit of mine and endeavor over the last 3 years, of like returning to a relationship with me where, frankly, I felt really safe with myself to divulge the information that my body and emotions were storing. Because, man, if it doesn't feel safe, it's never going to unveil itself. I have talked to multiple people who have, in their late 20s, early 30s, remembered things from 3 to 9 years old of trauma, real trauma, like usually it's sexual or physical trauma that they suppressed. And they literally did not remember. One woman, it was with her father, which is devastating. Another was at her grandparents' house. And it's like, what the heck do our bodies know that we don't? So the act of being present, slowing down, leaning in, and asking why allows for the cultivation of emotional intelligence. It allows for us to start to access these parts of ourselves that have been shut down just even by being busy, being on this device all the time. So by allowing space and allowing time for us to be fully present, that's really usually when we get to have some real breakthrough. So with that, now I want to kind of move on to the discussion of truth versus experience. Before I do, I just wanted to take a look here at the chat. Matt, thank you so much for joining. I really want to just touch on a few of the comments here. You said that Jesus Christ is real, but I feel if you're truly acknowledging history and the obvious greed of man, you can't deny religion has been used by man to manipulate. Interesting. I think you're so right. I think everything in life has been used in a way that has caused real, it's almost like, what's the right word? It's so many things in the world that has been good. Like you were talking about religion. Historically, there's so much potential for it to be good. And even today, there's so much potential for it to good. But man, has it been used to cause such derision, and it's devastating. Like, it's truly devastating. So I can completely agree with you on the manipulation front. Mr. Six Round, I saw you say, I was also brought up in strong Catholic values, and never I felt shame in my physical body. I don't know what kind of religion you guys calling Christians. It's interesting. I do wonder about the male upbringing versus female upbringing. I think that there's a big difference there. I actually don't think my brothers felt shame over their physical bodies. But I've actually heard across multiple religions among women the shame over physical body for multiple reasons. And frankly, that's something that we can totally talk about at some point. So I'm just checking back here on some of the questions here. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about the difference between truth and experience. I found that when it comes to somebody saying my truth, there's a danger there. There's a danger when it comes to you and I looking at the truth and viewing it as something entirely subjective. The freedom I've found is that what I know to be true is almost a superordinate principle. And my best friend actually said this. He said a superordinate principle is effectively equivalent to God, or like a principle of God. And a superordinate principle is very different than our experience, because, and this is frankly, this is my experience to date. So I'd love to hear your thoughts here. If something is true, there's a universal principle supporting it versus an application, which is almost akin to experience. Like there's a supporting principle, supporting truth that is, for the most part, immovable. But then my experience is something that is very much so real for me. It's very much so to be honored, to be expressed, to be conveyed, to be understood. And someone else can have a very opposing experience. But the second we start claiming my truth versus your truth, man, y'all, I think that's where we get really, really dangerous. I think that's where it gets so dangerous, because then it's who's right versus this is my experience. This is what I felt. This is what it was for me. There's a humility in that. There's almost an immediate acquiescence to, I want to be on the same team as you. Let's both share for the purpose of unity. And here's another thing too. Even if you're talking to someone, let's say, who's not somebody that you like, but we're still talking about experience, there's still a subservience to a higher order of truth that's so important. What actually happened? That's why people go to court. That's why we actually go to the court system. That's why we record conversations. That's why there's documentation to refer to on what's the basis and grounds upon which we can then understand each other's experience. And here's the thing, in addition to that, beyond documentation, beyond our own ability to look at literally a public record and say, okay, that's the truth. There is so much context that adds to experience versus truth. Truth lives in a record. This is what happened. This is objective. This is not to be subject to someone's interpretation other than this is what is. While experiences, man, can experiences be layered, and you can unpack it and you can say, but you've got to understand context, where I think with truth, it's just kind of what is. There's not a whole lot of context to add to it. Whereas experience, man, is it layered? Man, is it complex? Man, is it so incredibly personal and dynamic based on the individual, and so complex based on the relationship. And so I think where that comes into play is so important to really understand, because when someone says, this is my truth, there's something that almost immediately cuts us off to any other interpretation, any other context from someone else's experience, to then help us exhibit and feel compassion and empathy. Emotional intelligence has effectively two definitions. The first is to be aware of, understand, and express one's own experience and emotion, and the ability to handle interpersonal relationships with empathy and with wisdom. But if we're looking at the first half of emotional intelligence as the truth, there's no way that we're going to have space to handle someone else's emotions and experiences as or with empathy and with wisdom. So really, when we think about truth, this is interesting, and I hadn't thought about this before. When we think about truth versus experience, experience has context, experience has layers, experience has the need for integrating and understanding all of the intelligences that sum and amalgamate to the whole of the individual. Whereas truth is very binary. There's not a whole ton of context, and it is more black and white. It perhaps is a bit more dogmatic, let's say. I don't even like that word, but there's just something about it that lacks the layering and context there. It's less subjective. It can be in writing, but even then, if you're recording a conversation, being able to listen to the tone, that's really important too, and the context there. So the interpretation of two individuals when it comes to what is and what actually happened. I thought of this a while ago. It's like when we're trying to really understand reality, and this is reducing the conversation down for the purpose of what we're talking about here, truth versus experience. There's my experience, their experience, and the objective reality in the middle, the truth. And the truth is that public record, that recorded conversation. And then we've got my experience and your experience. And y'all, we have to be looking at it through those lenses, because your experience is so vastly different than mine, because you have 20, 30, 40 years of history. You have 20, 30, 40 years of backstory that contributes to right here, right now. In one sense, if you think about it, relationships are impossible, especially if you're going cross-cultural, cross-religion. If you're trying, even cross-age gaps, if you're trying to do intimate life with someone who is so wildly different than you, it only stands to reason and anticipation that it is going to be incredibly hard, because you're reckoning with decades upon decades of backstory. So right here, right now, the objective truth can be put into a bite-sized Happy Meal. Whereas then when you add in our experiences, man, does it become a buffet spanning just completely different restaurants. It's completely unlike each other. And so when you think about the truth versus the experience, man, we have to be so intentional and careful that we understand our own bias when we're talking from our experience. What feels to be so incredibly true for us is so often never what's true for somebody else. And therefore, it's just our experiences. And so until we really understand and hold almost like a sacrality around that, man, it's going to be so hard for us to operate on the same team, especially if we're in a relationship, whether it's, a partner relationship or parent and child or business partners. It's just so hard to look at the world through a similar lens when you're coming from such vastly different experiences. And the second we start to say my truth or the truth, we're really cutting the other person off from access and us from access to the other person's experience and their experience to ours. So there's a humility and almost submitting to, this is my experience and I feel it and I know it. Boy, do I know it. And I'm open to the fact that you might have something really different, and I'm willing to hear it. But that's the question. Have we actually done the work ourselves to understand our own experience in the first place, to be aware of it, understand it, and then express it, and then sit with the other person in their experience with empathy and with wisdom? And that is emotional intelligence. But until we're able to be aware of, understand, and express our own experience, there is no way we're going to be able to engage with someone else in theirs. So with that, I'm just following up with some of the chats here. Colin, thank you so much for joining. Pascal, thank you for coming on. Provost, Ruben, I'm just looking here through some of the chats. I love, Colin, how you said, I think that truth is relative and personal, but facts are not. That's a good point. I actually really, really like that distinction of truth versus facts. I think that's a really, really good point. No, I've never heard of a man named 𝐤𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐲, but I'm actually going to look into him. Thank you so much for sharing that. James, thank you for joining. Thomas, thank you for coming on. I'm just looking at some of these comments here. I just saw your note about kind of your experience in getting divorced. You just said, I don't know if too many people would believe my experience. Wow. Well, first, thank you so much for sharing that. That is so incredibly painful. I Isn't that so hard? Sometimes I'll tell people I'm divorced and I'll just get like people looking me up and down, like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I know what's wrong with me. I existed as a non-person for 8.5 years. And also my husband changed his faith midway through, so that didn't help. But the point about people not believing our experience, I think that that's actually, I'm so grateful you brought that up. We have to know our own experience and really give ourselves, frankly, the empathy and the care that we need. Because when I look back on my experience of moving through, specifically moving through the divorce, and just how devastating that was for a number of years, I had people questioning how sad I was. It was weird. People act weird. It's hard to understand, but they're all coming and they all have their own experience, right? So who's to say why? But I found that the most comforting thing I could do was actually to eliminate the voices around me, so that I actually really learned how to honor my own experience, because I had been so oriented to my compass being east and west. I was so like flooded. And actually, I heard that concept flooded by a therapist recently. And I love that concept of like, we get flooded. It's like our mind, our emotions, everything. It's like a tank that's getting up, rising, 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 and all of a sudden it floods and we can't handle it and it's too much and it's too overwhelming. That concept of flooding, I needed to just eliminate the noise, eliminate the voices, and I went into what I called the wilderness. Like, let me just go into peace, go into the quiet place where there's no one and nothing to distract me, to trigger me, until I really understand what in the dickens happened. Who am I? And obviously, I was still working, running my business. But the second I closed my laptop during those probably like 8 months, I would close the laptop and just almost immediately it was like my body knew it was time to grieve. And I really had to sit in my experience in quiet and solitude to then be able to know it, and then also be able to give myself compassion. Because if I was looking still externally for other people to validate my experience, it was so confusing. I remember going to just networking events and say I was going through a divorce, and people would say, "Congratulations." And I just felt so wildly misunderstood. I'm like, you don't understand. This is devastating. And so do I try to convince them, or do I honor my own experience by actually starting it to keep it close to the chest? And I just saw Goff Island, Rocky said, my ex and I have 3 kids, and my new wife has 2 kids from her ex. Good grief. That's so many children. Good for you. I actually am so proud of that, because I didn't have any children with my ex. And there's something about that actually I've just felt so sad about. I know that this isn't healthy, but for a time I actually wanted to have kids with him so that I could stay in touch with him. And now I can look back and be grateful that I don't. I don't know. I don't even want to say be grateful. It's just what is, Um, you said I'm not nice to myself, hence why I can't look in the mirror. You know, I was challenged. My best friend and I gave each other a 61-day challenge. And he said to me, he was like, I want you to write down one thing you love about yourself every day for 61 days. And I felt like I wanted to vomit. I was like, I will run another marathon. And I'm not a runner. I hate running. My marathon, I like permanently damaged my back. It was not good. I did not want to do that. Like, everything in me just like wanted to retreat. And that was probably one of the hardest emotional things I've ever done, was write one thing I liked about myself every day. And I think the simplicity of the exercise actually is what makes it really hard, that you actually have to go inward versus, oh, let me go do 20 push-ups, or let me go, it wasn't physical or it wasn't mental, it was actually emotional. And so I started out, and I was in the first like 5-10 days, I wrote something along the lines of, I love that I love other people. I love that I love God. And it was just like very kind of like distant and not really about me. But by day 15, I think I wrote, and this is obviously, I'm a girl, but I was like, I love that I love pretty things. And I think day 50, I wrote down, I love that I care so much. And for so many years while I was married, I actually wrote in my journal, I hate that I care so much. And so it was just wild to see that in 50 plus days, the things I hated about myself, actually, I came to honor and I came to love. And here's the thing, y'all. If we don't know who we are, there is no way we can really activate the giftings and the qualities in ourselves that make us thoroughly unique and also allows for us to fulfill the calling that is why we were created here in the first place. Do you, and this is gosh, is this so important? Do you believe you matter? Do you actually believe that you're here for a reason? I was sitting there with 5 women yesterday and today, and all of them in this retreat particularly came from a Christian background. And it's painful, hearing the stories and the pain that people go through. But at the end of the day, we have to actually look in the mirror and say, and figuratively, do I actually believe I'm worth loving? Do I actually believe I'm worthy? What do I actually believe about myself? What do I believe about God, about the world? And in that process for me of looking in the mirror and realizing, and this was a big moment for me. I was at an event that my partner and I were putting on for Amazon, and I was sitting in the back of the room, and this woman is talking, and she's holding a glass of water, a pitcher of water, over a basin. So in the glass, she pours some water and she holds it up and it's halfway full. And she says, so many of you will only give from a half full cup. And she fills it all the way to the top. And then she holds it up and she says, others of you will give from a full cup. And then she pours and pours and pours, and the water spills over the glass into the basin below. And then she holds up the glass and she says, this glass is for you. The basin is for everybody else. And y'all, I see this in both men and women alike, where we take pride in being depleted. We take pride in being burned out because it means we did so much. But man, if we had a fundamental shift in seeing and assigning value in our being versus just what we do, I believe it, and I've seen it, that our doing is actually that much more impactful when it's coming from a place of worthiness on a being level, on an inherent inner rooted, like guttural sense of I belong, I am important, I matter. Now I get to give it. This whole concept of self-love, and I'm putting that in air quotes because I think that term has just been demolished by society. That term of self-love is actually meant to power our ability to love others that much better. I'm just looking here at some of the chats. James, I just saw your comment here. I won't rest until I find someone who loves me. I really, that desire to be loved, man, isn't that the best, the best thing? And to love in return, we were made for connection. We were made for belonging. In the biblical narrative of God creating the world, He created Adam in this perfect garden with all these animals and plants and trees and tasks. He gave him this glorious task of name all the plants and animals, and God walked with Adam. And yet, even despite all of that, in that place, God said it is not good for man to be alone. So I actually think that's exactly right. Just being so committed to finding someone to love, to care for, to be loved by. And in the meantime, Jordan Peterson said this so beautifully. He's a psychologist from Canada and a professor, an author, among many other things. He said, become the person that is worthy of the partner that you want. So while we're waiting, while we're on the hunt, let's say, become the person that is worthy of that partner. Are you actually the man that is worthy of the wife you want? And that's another thing. Do we even know what we want to begin with? That was another conversation over the retreat yesterday and today. Knowing what we want is so intrinsically important, because how else will we even know if we're getting it, if we're living a life that we're proud of, if we're actually being the parent or the mother or the child that we want to be. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's so, so, so important. Um, I just wanted to reiterate, I know that this isn't your name, but for your handle, Monkey Balls, um, I feel, I hope you feel proud of yourself for the way that you're showing up and doing the work. I think that just like how we were talking about Jordan Peterson and that quote, the best thing we can do is becoming the person that we would be proud of. And, if anything, isn't that the greatest pursuit of our lives is creating the legacy with intention right here, right now. Every day we're creating our legacy. I wrote my eulogy when I turned 30. And, there was something about that that actually really, again, to that point of looking in the mirror, doing that was another mirror moment. Looking at my eulogy, looking at who I said I wanted to be. Am I actually living that way now to be that person? What behaviors need to change to match the beliefs, or what beliefs need to change to then inform the behaviors? That's a big and important question. What needs to change in my life? Is it at that inner level, the belief level, or is it at the external level? Is it at the being or the doing level? And in that becomes so much freedom to then be able to truly experience pride over how we're living. Um, I just love, you said, I think he's a great man because his passion shows through his character. I love that. I completely agree. I really love Jordan Peterson. I need to go back and read Maps of Meaning. I'm not sure if you've read that, but yeah, I really loved his 12 Rules for Life. Y'all, thank you so much for joining me tonight on the Knowing Show. This conversation is incredibly important, because there's something around misattributed blame that can come when we don't recognize, oh, I'm actually so angry right now because of the past. It's actually not you. And it's actually not this experience right here in this moment. Because when we do misattribute our pain, man, we can leave a lot of damage in our wake. So it takes radical responsibility to heal from the past. It takes the slowing down, leaning in, and asking why of the present moment to then go uproot what needs to be done in the past. James, you actually said something really beautiful about wildflowers on empty grasslands. I feel like there's actually an analogy there in terms of our minds. What are we planting? What are the flowers and the trees of our mind? What are we feeding and tending to? Are we feeding and tending to the men and women that are our own ideal, that are going to be ready and actually prepared for the person that comes our way? Are we actually going to tend to the garden of our minds, to use the analogy in James Allen's book, As a Man Thinketh? Are we actually tending to our minds so that the past is not having power in the present? So that we're not projecting the past onto our future and living in fear of repeating what was so traumatic for us in the past? Are we actually free right here today? Um, Y'all, I really appreciate you joining tonight. I just saw you say, I found out I was dyslexic after I struggled to graduate high school. Good for you. I feel that's so impressive. I feel like honestly, recently I've been like reading numbers and I'm like, am I dyslexic? So I'm with you. Y'all, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Tomorrow morning we'll be going live. I'm going to be reading through A Course in Miracles. I just started doing that every day because I wanted to do it for me. I need that. I need the reminder of truth. Even tonight, I came up to my room and I had lesson 4 that I wrote out this morning, or I read out this morning on the earlier show. And it was exactly what I needed. And actually, I'm going to read it because it actually has to do with our show tonight. Lesson number 4. So, A Course in Miracles has a lesson every single day through the end of the year. And we're on lesson 4 because it's January 4th. This lesson, these thoughts do not mean anything. And man, I feel like I actually really needed that tonight because I was frustrated about something. And it was really helpful to be like, oh, my own frustration is just part of an old program I have, just like their frustration is a part of their old program. And it doesn't really mean anything. When we can actually take our thoughts, take them captive and make our thoughts be in submission to ourselves, man, that is probably one of the most important things we can possibly do. So when we're thinking about the truth versus our experience, understanding that when it comes to our experience, we have all the power in the world to understand, to ask why of it, to express it. And then we also have the choice to enter into our relationships with other people with empathy and with wisdom. And we don't have to do that, but that's almost like the gift of once we can tend to ourselves and really care for the wounds that we're experiencing on our end, man, then we get to go and love someone else all the more. So with that, thank you